January 31st, the last day in January. We've been up here a month already. So we are going to do some work with our legislative counsel, John Gray. Why don't you come on up to the hot seat? I've passed out, and I know John, I don't know if we need to put this up on the screen, but we've passed out the law that lays out the structure of the cash fund. I know that we had joint fiscal committee in here, a couple, not committee, joint fiscal come in, and Scott came in as well. Emily and Scott to really kind of give an overview of what the cash fund is, but we really need to understand the law on the cash fund, what the structure is and how it can be used. And John's going to walk us through this, and I really like the committee to ask him a lot of questions because we really need to understand how the cash fund functions, what the parameters are, because our capital bill is got some money there for the cash fund, and that's going to be talked about from now until the day we adjourn, whenever that day may be. Sometime in May.
June 30th. I don't think it's May, but John Gray, Office of Legislative Counsel. I am going to screen share for this. I think it'll be helpful. I know you guys have the doc there, so you don't necessarily have to look up, but at least for my purposes, it may be nice to be able to point to particular text. So we're talking about the cash fund for capital and essential investments. So this is Title 32, Section 1001B. Essentially, this was a fund established to reduce borrowing. The idea is that, in the capital bill, we're talking about expenditures that are funded by general obligation bonds. So you're incurring interest costs over time. This particular language, this cash fund was established in the 2022 big bill, the budget. And the language that was actually proposed at the time was immediately amended in the following big bill in 2023 and made pretty substantial modifications. I may show you that at some point, but I'm just going to jump into the actual language here so we can get rolling.
Do the new folks know what we mean when we say the big bill? The big bill means it is our state budget for the upcoming fiscal year that comes out of the appropriations. It's our appropriations bill. And we short the way we call it, it's the big bill. So you're going to hear that term in the building, and that means our state budget for FY26, our general fund state budget. You're also going to hear the T-bill. That's a transportation bill that comes out of the transportation committee that deals with dollars that go into transportation projects. But that also has to go through appropriations committee to be appropriated, but it's called the T-bill. And then, of course, you're going to have the capital bill, which is us. The three bills that need to pass, and the yield bill, which is dealing with school funding, property tax. Those four bills have to pass before we adjourn. We can't adjourn until those four bills pass. You got to fund your state government, you got to fund your transportation needs, and you got to fund your capital needs. And then you also have to deal with what the yield's going to be for your property taxes for schools. And I don't think that the yield thing is going to change much this session, but it could. Those are the bills that need to pass so we can have government function for the rest of for the fiscal year. Fiscal year begins July 1st, so we have to have that all in place by June. May or June. And if we don't, we're still working on it. But you can't start the fiscal year without a state budget. So when you hear the big bill, it means the appropriations, state budget.
So one of the things to think about with the big bill is that not only is it a set of appropriations, it includes things like sections that create language like this. So there can be substantive pieces in there beyond just money. So the big bill created, or the language for the cash fund is put into the big bill. So this creates a fund for capital and essential investments to be administered by finance and the state treasurer. And it has two subaccounts. So the first of these is the capital infrastructure subaccount. This is what in the initial language that passed in 2022 was the whole of the fund. The whole of the fund was just dedicated to essentially being a cap bill type fund. So the capital infrastructure subaccount to defray the costs of future capital expenditures that would otherwise be authorized in the Capital Construction Act and paid for using the state's general obligation bonding authority and debt service obligations, or paid for as a direct associated cost for capital projects. So the way that I think about this is this subaccount was a way of siphoning things that otherwise would have been in the cap bill backed by bonded dollars. And because you could fund them with cash in this fund, you're reducing costs over time. And I think that you guys heard from Emily Byrne at JFO maybe a week ago or 2 weeks ago, and about the fiscal thinking around this, but that's the first account in here. The second subaccount in the fund is the Other Infrastructure Essential Investments and Reserves subaccount. This was created in the 2023 Big Bill, and this is to fund essential investments and infrastructure needs, create reserves for these expenditures, and make contingent appropriations for other infrastructure investments. I would call out, there's no defined term as to what essential investments is in this section. So I wonder what this means, but I hope
Flexibility means literally it's flexible in terms of essential investments could be interpreted for IT, could be interpreted for transportation, could be interpreted for everything else. They would be essential things that are needed and we need to invest in. I think that would be the perception from the appropriations world.
So, I mean, this is interesting. I think it's enlightening because it showcases part of what's kind of unique when we talk about some of this language that's created outside of the typical ways we deal with. So we think of, cap bill, we do it in this room with the expertise of this room that spends a lot of time with the cap bill, right? But sometimes when things go through the big bill or other procedures, obviously they're vetted, but I think they go through a slightly different process going through appropriations and the like. And so we end up in situations where it will be very helpful for me to talk with JFO and other folks just about accounting language, because we start to see things that I wouldn't, if I was putting pen to paper, start with. It's just not where I would start because it's not where my brain lies. And so I think what's interesting in this space is like getting the actual practice, which is understood, I think, by those who are acting under these statutes, to line up with the language is a bit of a question here. So things like undefined essential investment just raises flags to me, but it may be that it's operating fine. I just want to draw out, there are questions as to what these could mean. So those are your two accounts. The first, again, is just your like classic cap bill type expenditure. It's a way of reducing costs over time by having cash up front.
I have a question, Kevin.
Can you help me with the difference between flexible and fungible?
In terms of where?
It's not in here. I hear all the time that those are fungible funds, which means to me as a layman, I'm admitting that, okay, it was identified to be used here, but we have the authority to use it over here. That's my understanding of the word fungible. This to me sounds like similar, sort of like the major maintenance, planning, reuse, and even security enhancements. Those pots of money can be used in many ways at the discretion of, yes.
So, but you got two separate funds here. So what you're dealing with in one are what you're seeing in our capital bill for the most part. What you're seeing in number two allowed flexibility in the appropriations world to use cash fund dollars that are not in the capital bill, could be in the T-bill, could be IT infrastructure that needed chunks of money. So I don't see the term fungible. I mean,
Okay, that's fine. They're not even,
Clarify, so like fungible in the most basic way means it can be replaced by something that's of equal value of some sort. Essential means it's needed. They're not the same term.
Okay.
So
Not even related.
there's more
fine.
ratcheting down we
Okay.
could do.
That's fine. Thank you.
I think you may be getting at something in subsection C, which we'll come to, which is just like how the actual dollars are spent.
right?
Sorry, yeah, I understood what you were saying about essential investments and that it can be interpreted very broadly, but do we have an example of how this has been used? In the-
Yes, and I
Yeah.
was trying to think what was appropriated when we first had some money, when it first, I think it was in probably 23. I was trying to think, what were some of those items that were in that second sub-account? There was a whole list of items.
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head, but 23 would be the earliest that you could have.
Yeah, Scott, do you remember?
Scott Moore joined this, but I don't have it off the top of my head, Madam Chair, but I'll look while we're talking.
Yeah, because it listed it in the big bill, what those projects were for the capital ones, but it also listed for the infrastructure essential investments. I think there was money going to some transportation projects in there. There was a whole slew. It was listed in the big bill for that.
And this is a good thing to draw out too. It can be easy just in the context of this room to think that we're talking about something exclusive to the capital bill, and it's not. The cash funds available for other purposes. Obviously, that first sub-account was talking about things that would otherwise be authorized in the cap bill. But this other infrastructure sub-account, there have been expenditures authorized in the big bill for using the cash fund. So you can't just look at the capital bill to see what's happening with the cash fund. You also have to look elsewhere.
So then that plays in a little bit. It gets really, there's layers to this because as the appropriations committee is putting together the state budget, the administration proposes X amount in a cash fund. Say they propose 50 million cash fund, okay? And say 25 million of that is for our capital bill. And 25 million is for the second sub-account. Okay, that's what the governor could propose. So as appropriations committee is doing their work and as we're doing our work, maybe for our piece, we may stay at 50 million. We may stay at 40 million, depending what the pressure is on the general fund. We have to work with the appropriations committee because they know the structure, they know the pressures of the state budget. We don't know those. If they see a cash fund with a total of 50 million in there, they may need $20 million to balance the state budget, which they're going to pull from that cash fund. So then that means that will have an impact on the amount of cash possibly that could be available for our capital projects and how much cash is available for that second sub-account.
Well, then I think I'm left with a question like Kevin's, which is suppose you set aside something, $5 million to buy down. I don't even want to give an example. Can't you just use it for something else then later on? Is it not flexible in the way that Kevin was suggesting? Must you say what is being set aside for and must it then be used that way?
Yes.
We authorize 4 specific projects. Yep.
And it can't then be switched to something else.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you guys could discuss if you wanted to just have a blank check for something. It's not something that I've seen, but the way that it's been done is when we are putting in appropriations or the like, it's authorizing 4 particular projects. That's the discussion that happens across this committee. The whole session is how to refine and ensure that those dollars are being spent in particular ways. I think when we get to sub C, just talking about what the funds are used for, it will be clear because it's the premise of this is that you're making specific appropriations. It's not just a fund sitting here and people dip in and grab some money. It's you have to authorize spending from the cash fund. So that's the key first part. That's not talked so much about here because it's just general practice of appropriation. So yes, you need spending authority, and then you have to talk about where you get that money from. And what this is talking about is the source of that money. It's the cash fund. Getting cash rather than pocket dollars.
So if you found anything, Scott? Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm just,
Okay, well, let us know when you do, because I think it would be important for the committee to know what some of those items were in that sub-account. So Brian, were you done?
Not even, yes. Yes, I'm happy to wait for sub C and I think I understand now. It gets used for what it's been specified for. If not, it gets hoovered back up and allocated to something else.
And we'll talk about the way, what happens if funds are not used as well, because and that ties into the Budget Adjustment Act language that we'll discuss.
Thank you.
So subsection B, so sub A, we talked about creating the fund, setting up the 2 sub-accounts, what kinds of things those govern. Your capital infrastructure one is like your cap bill, your other captures a big bucket of things. Sub B, subsection B, this is fund accounts. This is saying what the sub-accounts actually consist of. So the capital infrastructure sub-account, that's the one you guys probably care the most about, may consist of transfers made by the General Assembly of 4% or less of the last completed fiscal year's general fund appropriations, less the amount necessary to fund the state's general obligation debt service in the year for which the transfer is being made, as determined by the treasurer and the commissioner of finance and management. So the way to think about this is, right, if, let's say you take 4% of general fund appropriations from fiscal year 24, that would be your most recent completed fiscal year. We're in fiscal year 25 right now. We would then subtract out the debt service costs from this year, 25, from that 4% of the appropriations made from the general fund in fiscal year 24, and it would give us a figure. That figure might be negative, in which case no money is going into the cash fund, right? But the idea is, you'll recall that Nick stated this 4% figure came as a result of calculations over a 5-year period, basically, of how much expenditures on debt service were costing as a percentage of general fund appropriations. And that figure over fiscal years 2018 to 2023 was like 4.6%, something like this. So this 4% figure was meant to capture generally what the debt obligation costs the services would be, but hoping that at some point your general obligation debt service would be lower than that 4% figure. And so some funds would remain and those would go into the cash fund. So that's what, and additionally in subdivision B, you see that any interest earned by the sub-account remains with that account. It doesn't go back to the general fund. Interest stays within the sub-account. So money going into this capital infrastructure account is taking a percentage of the last completed fiscal year general fund appropriations, then subtracting out debt service costs, and then the interest generated from that remains in the sub-account.
The debt service cost, is that what we owe in debt, which is like the 78 million or 80 million? So if folks want to pull out your spreadsheet and go to the last page, line 178. Make sure everybody gets their line. It's on the back, last page. Lines 178. You will see annual general fund transfer pursuant to 32 VSCA 101, the whatever. 14.8 million. 14.8 million. That is from the formula.
Okay, so that's that 4%.
That's the 4% minus the debt service costs.
Oh, that's
In red, it's on line 178. 14.8 million. So that's what's available to us for the next, well, for the next 2 years, but we know definitely for FY 26. When the governors recommend, doesn't mean it will stay there. But this is what the governor's recommending, that there's 14.8 million in cash to go towards our projects in our capital bill. That 14.8 comes from this formula in A.
And that's for FY 26. So
For FY
27 will be its own animal.
Yep, because we're not there yet for 2 reasons. One, we haven't completed this fiscal year yet. We don't know what the debt service is going to be in the FY 26 budget. And appropriations committee, our big bill, we only appropriate 1 year at a time. So next year, when we come in January with our budget adjustment, there'll be a figure there for FY 27.
Even if we had those other inputs, debt service can be accelerated, can it not? I think the treasurer alluded to that when he was here. Sometimes that may be prudent.
Yeah, it depends how much cash, how much is in the state budget. There's the flexibility to do that or not with other pressures. So then if you go down to the next line, 179, what does the PY stand for?
previous year.
Previous year, oh yeah, previous year interest. That's your interest that was earned in the previous fiscal year in cash fund was 826 cents. So we earned 826,000 in interest on the cash that was sitting there. So that goes to our capital budget. Then the next one, I followed it, but I didn't, there was something that was left on the bottom line for the cash flow. That 1.2 million. Not clear what that really pertained to, if there was some projects that didn't go out the door, and there was that money bottom line because the projects didn't go out the door. And that might be a flag for the repo committee.
No,
Ask about that.
restate the question though. So this is the number we believe we had. Approach could still potentially take some of this from us.
It could,
It's plausible.
I mean,
could.
the money
It-
exists, it's whether or not they're gonna let us use it.
And that's why we have a lot of conversations with appropriations as we start working through our budget. And they start working through the state. Because they could have some real pressures somewhere. And need a couple $1 million to fill a hole. And they may not have any place to go. And they may say, can you give us $1 million? Is there a way you can find to free up $1 million out of the cash fund? And then we would have to pick that up somehow within the bonded capacity. Because we have a box of 100. We have a box of 106 million to work with. Cash is in addition to that. So if you lose some cash, you still have to work within that 106 million.
Does everybody get that? So the $14.8 million exists. It's there. So what Alice is trying to explain is that doesn't mean we get to necessarily mean we get to use the 14, which is Joe's question or point. That $14.8 million, it's there. Appropriations might be like, we kind of need 5 million. Can we work together on this? We might then get 9.8. So the money exists. It's just whether or not we get to have our use of it.
I have a follow-up discussion point for that, but don't want to short circuit the presentation. So,
Go for it. No, what's your follow-up?
well, I heard some discussion before we went live regarding if
Can you get the page?
the
This was hooked in with it. So sorry, Joe.
the will is to reduce our new bonding issuances, and so we're probably going to see less bonded dollars available in future capital bills. As to whether or not some of the cash fund should be removed from the purview of appropriations. That's a
We don't
different discussion.
appropriate. We don't appropriate. We allocate. So we can put our projects down. And part of the way the legislature operates, there's a lot of communications that happens between these money committees because we're all interconnected. So we make best decisions we can with the information we have at the time with working with our colleagues. Because they have pressures in their budget. The T fund has pressures in their budget, and we have pressures in our budget. And all of that kind of works together to figure out how we can sort of help each other in different ways. There are sometimes, if the general fund is really flush and there aren't as much pressure in their world, but there's more pressure in our world, we can use more general fund. Sometimes it's in the reverse. But those are all discussions that occur between the committees. And you come to some agreement somehow. You come to some agreement. And in the House, we finish our budget work in March, end of March, goes through the House floor and goes off to the Senate. Senate can do it totally different. They can just do everything totally different than what we did. And then what happens is you've got a conference committee for appropriations bill, big bill, which is made up of 3 members from the House Appropriations Committee and 3 members from the Senate Appropriations. You've got a conference committee from the Capitol bill, 3 members from this committee and 3 members from the Senate Institutions Committee. And that's where you hammer out the differences.
To the point of the administration had mentioned that, that's where, that it's maybe keep it in the back of your head, but it's not gonna happen. It's what they've said they would like to see in that whole conversation we had yesterday. It's just not going to happen. So.
It's really a very similar concept to what already occurs. In that you're simply replacing cash with bonded indebtedness. Because from a de facto basis, if institutions, it's the first overseer, if you will, of the capital bill, and the primary vehicle is bonded indebtedness, that it's really just, it's an indirect appropriation. You're appropriating funds from future years, basically.
But we don't have the authority to appropriate. It's in the Appropriations Committee to appropriate. It's not, we can allocate.
So
We allocate where those dollars go. We approve the projects. And we approve the amount of dollars that go towards those projects. We don't have the authority to actually release those dollars.
well, I guess to redefine my concern is that if, and I don't know how you would remedy it, or maybe you just don't. If the future bonding dollars available continues to decrease and there's not an appetite to make cash available for the capital budget, that could be a serious, that could be
Be very serious, and
a
then.
very serious issue. And so how do you remedy that? Or you just,
You do it, that's why you do a 2-year budget, so you have some flexibility in there. And you just keep slogging along.
And we
You
would,
keep doing what, you do the best you can with what you got.
still allocate the money,
Yeah,
but it still just has to go downstairs to appropriations to have the seal of approval, if you will.
so if our bonding capacity decreases, and if we don't have access to as much cash, we get a lot of pressure. So that's where your debt affordability committee comes into play, to see where all those pressures are. Credit agencies, to make sure we don't get too out of whack, that it then starts impacting our credit rating because we're not taking care of our infrastructure, because we're not putting enough dollars towards taking care of it.
This might sound dumb, maybe it's not, I don't know. But like, for example, we can borrow money. That's the way the process does it. We borrow the money. But next year, for example, we don't have the authorization to say, here's the $81 million to pay the debt service, that's appropriations. So they're paying the debt that we're allowed to authorize. But when it comes to cash, we're just not allowed to decide where the cash goes. So it's kind of seems weird, and that's not how we'd run our personal businesses, but that's how it's set up.
well, it seems weird, because it's weird.
Government is not business.
Yeah.
Because we're dealing with public dollars.
So that's.
We're dealing with public needs. And it's just a very different function. And there's a lot of balls that have to be balanced here. And things will change from what you see now. The end of January is going to be a totally different landscape come May. Totally different. And we don't know what it's going to be, but it's going to be different. And, there's compromises are always made in any piece of legislation. There's compromises that are made. You got 149 other members that have all different viewpoints. And then the Senate, there's 30 members there. And somehow all that has to come together, and there's a give and take that happens in the building. There's a give and take that happens between committees. And, we had one situation here a few years ago. We were very close to putting our budget together. And we were finalizing the bottom line, how much we were going to bond for. I don't think we had the cash fund going then. How much we were going to bond for. And all of a sudden I had a member, the chair of Commerce Committee, and a member from Appropriations Committee walk through the door and said, we need some help. We need a couple $1 million. Can you find a couple $1 million in your budget to help us? That was at the 11th hour, if not almost the 12th hour. Because there was a real hole and some policy that these folks wanted to put in. And they came in, can you help us? Those things happen. So now we've got two pots here. Capital budget, but the cash. And the cash fund's not in our control because it's general fund dollars. It's appropriations committees. You find anything, Scott?
Madam Chair, my apologies for the delay. I was looking through all the bills from 22, 23, 24 quickly. So I did find an example of what the other essential items would be. In Act 78, which was for FY 23, the statement here is that $14.5 million is reserved in the other infrastructure essential investments and reserve subaccount to provide the state match for federal funding for water and wastewater related projects under IIJA. That's an example of what that other would be used for.
Is there anything else listed?
Not for this act, but I'll go to the next year and.
Because I think there was some transportation things that were done.
Yeah, so let me just, the next big bill and I'll
Yeah.
get back to you in just a moment.
So in the interest of time and making sure we're on the same page, I'm booked till 11. I can run late. I've emailed to push my next obligation back, but I just want to make sure we're on the same page and make sure that we have time to talk about the BAA language. Well, so we just talked about the capital infrastructure subaccount and that 4% figure. One thing I would draw your attention to is that it's up to 4%. It's 4% or less. And you'll recall that some of the requested language this year from the administration is to have that firm 4% figure. And that's what we're talking about, because technically nothing may be transferred under this, because it's just up to that 4% figure. The second subaccount, the other infrastructure essential investments and reserves subaccount, consists of any appropriations or transfers made by the General Assembly from the general fund or any other state fund. And there's contingent transfers that satisfy, there's a set of these citations you see to 32 VSA section 308 and 308C. Those are your rainy day fund in 308C. And in 308, that is the general fund budget stabilization reserve. So that's procedures that fund reserved with an account have to go through. And what this is saying is that contingent transfers that have satisfied the first, which is the stabilization reserve, but don't have to meet the rainy day reserve conditions, could be moved into this cash account. So this other infrastructure account is consisting of any appropriations or transfers made by the General Assembly, some contingent transfers meeting this condition, and then contingent transfers made from other state funds. So it's different than the way that the capital infrastructure subaccount is set up to have that 4% figure less your debt service obligations. We get to sub C, which was subject of discussion kind of at the start of this, use of funds. So monies in the fund accounts are only used for particular purposes. Expenditures made by the General Assembly from the capital infrastructure subaccount for tangible capital investments with an anticipated lifespan of 20 years or more. So this is something that you guys will be quite familiar with, but we're talking about machinery, buildings, things that investments that last a long time, kind of classic cap build type investments. Additionally, expenditures can be made from the capital infrastructure subaccount for engineering and architectural costs directly associated with the proposed capital project. So those are your permissible uses of those funds, but it's still the case that you authorize particular expenditures from the fund. So just because this sets out a restriction on eligibility conditions for what could come from this, it still requires the authorization. It's not as if people are just grabbing at random. That's the expenditure shall only be made by the General Assembly. So the General Assembly is taking an action to cause that to happen.
Oh, shoot, sorry.
We forgive you, Sean.
For the other infrastructure essential investments and reserve subaccount, same permissible purposes. That's your subdivision A, any expenditure eligible under subdivision 1 of this subsection C. So anything that would have met the conditions for the capital infrastructure subaccount, that also applies to this other infrastructure account. Additionally, it picks up another pool of permissible uses. Any other essential investments and infrastructure needs, including transportation-related projects and capitalization of revolving loan funds. So this other infrastructure subaccount has broader and potentially substantially broader permissible uses of funds. Subsection D, all balances at the end of a fiscal year are carried forward and remain part of the fund. This last language in subsection D, that the commissioner shall not anticipate receipts for the fund accounts and issue warrants thereon. For certain accounts, the commissioner will anticipate the receipt of funds like federal funds and will begin issuing warrants saying, if used to spend money in the absence of those receipt of federal funds, knowing that the federal funds are coming. What this is saying is that for this account, the commissioner won't anticipate receipts for the fund and issue warrants thereon. So they're not doing it for this account.
So when you see the word notwithstanding, it's saying regardless of what this law is saying, we're doing it different. That's what the notwithstanding means. So whenever you see notwithstanding in language, that's what it means. Regardless of what that particular law is saying, we're not going to do it that way. It's a simple way of explaining it.
Yep. No, that's exactly right. And I'll also just say, if you actually check this citation, I don't think this is a perfectly precise notwithstanding because the subject of section 511 is not exactly what this is talking about. But it's clear from the sentence what is meant. And then subsection E, which we're also going to talk about in the context of the proposed language for the Budget Adjustment Act spending authority. So any entity authorized to make expenditures from the capital infrastructure subaccount, so that's in your cap bill, big bill, wherever that spending authorization came from, that entity shall have not more than 2 years from the legislative session in which the act authorizing the expenditure was enacted to encumber the funds. So designate them for a particular project. They don't have to have spent the funds, they just need to encumber the funds within that 2-year period. And to talk about the 2-year period, because there's been some expression that this might be confusing, the way that I read this is, so it's not more than 2 years from the legislative session in which the act authorizing the expenditure was enacted. So I think of that as in which the act authorizing the expenditure was enacted is just designating which legislative session we're talking about. And then we're saying not more than 2 years from that session. So the session lasts until the session ends, and then you would have 2 years from that. Lastly, any remaining unencumbered funds shall remain part of the fund account. So the way that I read this subsection E is it's saying you've got 2 years. If you're an entity for which spending authority has been granted to use this cash fund, you've got 2 years to encumber those funds. Otherwise, the unencumbered funds are remaining part of the fund account. And I think of this as being about cash being special. Cash is different than bonded dollars. And to try to draw that out, we'll flip to 701C. So this is your language governing the capital construction bill. And in particular, I'm going to talk about subsection C here. So spending authority authorized by a capital construction act, so what you guys do, shall carry forward until expended unless otherwise provided. And then under 1, all unexpended funds remaining for projects authorized by those acts enacted in a legislative session that was 2 or more years prior to the current legislative session shall be reported. So 1, you got to report if those haven't been expended within that 2-year period. And may, it's key that it's may, not shall, may be reallocated in future capital construction acts. And then second, any amounts appropriated in those previous capital construction acts that are unexpended for at least 5 years, so if you hit the 5-year trigger, shall be reallocated to future capital construction acts. So in this case, we're talking about after 2 years, you're going to report in, say, why aren't the funds going out? And D talks about this, but we don't need to look at the actual text, but you're going to report essentially on what's going on with the project. And you may reallocate those funds, but you don't have to. But if they're unexpended after 5 years, at that point, there's a shall. So they're meant to be reallocated after that piece. I just want to contrast that with, and I'll return to what we were just looking at, spending authority provisions here for the cash fund. This is just talking about encumbrance. need to encumber those dollars within 2 years, otherwise they're remaining part of the fund. And I think of that as trying to protect cash as something to be used today. Like that's the advantage of cash. So if you had encumbered funds that are preventing you from otherwise using the cash fund, you've kind of defeated the utility of the fund. So I think of this as a measure that's meant to protect and ensure the fiscal responsibility of the cash fund. At least that's what seems intuitive to me about this piece. I will pause there because we can talk about the proposed language in the Budget Adjustment Act. Or we can talk about whatever you guys want.
And tell me if I'm completely, out of my mind, but is there a list or is there somewhere we can go that tells us how much cash is 3 years out or 4 years out or coming up to 5 years?
So,
Oh,
so
yeah. The repo.
so
That's what that's what they're doing.
Well, we haven't done it for cash yet.
Okay.
they've not had reason to do it
We don't
yet.
have to do it for cash.
We have the 2-year figure.
Because the cash hasn't existed long enough.
Right.
Encumbered.
Right.
Yeah.
This is new for who has
Yep.
who has control of that, deciding if it's 2 or more years.
So
Cash.
yep, there are two pieces of this. Your point is absolutely correct that some of this hasn't existed long enough for there to even be a trigger. But the provisions in 701 that we were just looking at, 701A, refer specifically to spending authority authorized by a capital construction act. So if the authorization for spending from the cash fund came in the capital bill, it will be picked up by this sub C, and there will be a check-in at the 2-year figure. That would happen. But if the spending authority happens elsewhere, like in the big bill, which is, I think, what Scott was referencing in the earlier provision, that would not be picked up by this 2-year check-in. I don't honestly know what governs the general fund, like how frequently they check in or how they deal with reallocations or the like, but there is a difference, and the cash fund is weird. It's like in this hybrid role where you have a cap bill-like part, and not to confuse you guys more, but I'm going to show you the amendments that happened in the
sure.
2023 big bill. So here what you can see is it used to be called the Capital Expenditure Cash Fund. So in 2022, that's what it was called. And then the next year, it was amended to be the Cash Fund for Capital and Essential Investments. At its creation, it was just this Capital Expenditure Cash Fund. It was specific to what is now the Capital Infrastructure Subaccount. So it was just cap bill type provisions. It was basically a way of shunting things off of the cap bill and onto cash. And then in 2023, this new subaccount, the other infrastructure account, was added. And the way that transfers were made was changed as well. It used to just be that the fund consisted of interest, any appropriations or transfer made. You didn't have this 4% figure. It was quite different at its conception. It was just a way of moving things off the cap bill onto cash. And now it's taken on, I would say, a quite different form. And so now you have this oddity of some things being governed based on where the spending authority derived from. So you have this 2-year check-in under 701A. And then if you're not in that, you don't have the same check-in. So I can talk about the proposed Budget Adjustment Act language. This might be a natural time to talk about it, but I can pause.
Yeah. If you can go back to prior what you were just talking about, because I was looking in last year's capital bill to see what the language was, because we carry in our capital bill the items that are funded through cash. And it's also in the appropriations. And it's done in both places because projects that are capital build projects that are funded with bonded dollars or in the capital bill. Okay, so if 2 years from now you want to go back, someone wants to go back and find a project, they're going to look at the capital bill for that project. So when you throw cash into the mix, those projects have to be listed in the big bill because that's where the appropriation occurs. But in order to be able to track those projects, people aren't going to know to go to the appropriations bill. the big bill. So we also carry that language in the capital bill. So we list those projects as well. Indicates coming from cash in the capital bill. So the heading, I was trying to find out what the heading is. It's authorization in FY '24, spending authority for the following capital projects are authorized as follows. So that's from the cash fund.
Yep. So there is spending authority for some cash fund expenditures through the capital bill. And if you think about it, it's intuitive because this capital infrastructure subaccount is cost that would otherwise be authorized in the Capital Construction Act and paid for using GO, a general obligation bond. So it's just authorizing a different basis, essentially, for those dollars to be spent on a particular project. So the proposed budget adjustment language would take this subsection E, which is your spending authority, which is our 2-year encumbrance restriction on cash fund, and basically eliminating that and replacing it with saying, this is subject to the provisions of 701C, the way that spending authority works in 701C. So that's your 2-year check-in and your 5-year that you shall reallocate after 5 years. Additionally, there would be the reporting provisions of subsection D. But what I want to call out as being meaningfully different between these is, as we just talked about, some cash fund expenditures are already governed by 701A. If the spending authority was authorized in the Capital Construction Act, it's picked up by this. So that has this 2-year may and 5-year shall be reallocated. So some are already picked up by 701A. The second piece of this that I think is important to note is we were just talking about encumbrance when we were talking about the cash flow. So designating cash for particular pieces. We're talking about reallocation here when we're talking about the capital bill itself. I honestly don't know what the thinking was going into setting up the cash fund, but my guess is that people thought of cash as meaningfully different from bonded dollars, and that they wanted to ensure that those funds were encumbered quickly, and they want that to be a meaningful part of the process. And you can think of that as freeing up cash for other projects so they're immediately available. If you only subjected, so the change that would happen if you made the BAA proposed edit is you would no longer have the encumbrance restriction, and instead you would have this may reallocate after 2 years. That doesn't tell us definitively that they will be. Now, maybe best practice is that people would just reallocate cash fund dollars after 2 years out of like fiscal responsibility, something like that. But what I want to point out is just that these are substantively different. And if that request is being characterized as a technical amendment, I don't think that's totally accurate. There's a difference between encumbrance and reallocation, and this would change the way that the cash fund operates. And I think that the cash fund is operating differently because we're recognizing that cash is different than bonded dollars. But I would say it's going to be hard to make a decision today about that proposal in the absence of more information. And I think what would be useful to know is how folks, the administration, are currently approaching the cash fund. Do they think that they're operating the cash fund in the way that they're operating other kinds of spending authority that happen in the capital bill? Because it might be that what's needed is just an alignment with current practice. But given that the cash fund is new, I'm guessing there's just not an actual practice on this front. I hope that is helpful. I'm going to stop sharing but I can pull it back up very easily.
I know this is confusing. It's confusing to me for a lot of different reasons.
Did you talk to a folks at all?
Did
It's not good if you're confused.
well, it's, you
Madam
you
Chair.
get it, and then you lose it, and then you get it.
That's kind of weird.
You get it, and then you lose it, and then you get it.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's finally bring the committee up to speed.
Yeah.
This BAA technical change is how it was presented to me. It was late Wednesday, Wayne LaRoche is our liaison. And this came up section 78 in the general fund VA. He showed me the language that struck the language in E and connected it to 701A. And I just could see the language it was struck and what they wanted to add. And I said, well, what is 701A? Because I hadn't seen it. So he got me a copy of that. And I quickly read it, and my gut was telling me this is more complicated than being just a simple little change. So I reached out to John, and John did some work on Thursday. So then, if you remember yesterday, I asked at the end of committee if Troy, Mary, and I could get together with John to go through this. We did, just like what you just heard now. And three of us came to the conclusion that this needs a little more vetting, and to make the recommendation to appropriations that they should hold off and not put this language in budget adjustment. And we should both be working on this in the subsequent weeks here, and either clear up the language in the capital bill or clear it up in the big bill. I stopped in at the appropriations committee room on my way out of the building last night. Emily was there, Catherine was there from Joint Fiscal Office. I gave them a heads up what we might be thinking. And also sent an email to Representative Shy, Representative LaRoche, and Representative Harrison to let them know that at this point, there's some members of the committee that would recommend holding off on putting that language in. So we want to bring the committee up to speed and see if there's any disagreement with that. Recommend.
I have a question,
Yeah.
and it may have been addressed when I walked out for a second. What was the impetus for this change? Like who?
The administration.
Okay, is that, so just what we heard the other day, that wasn't something else. Okay.
And, their justification was kind of align with capital, just to ensure that the review and reallocation process is aligned for these, which makes sense as a concern. And additionally, there's some thinking that the time period specified was unclear.
Mhm.
I will say, I don't think the time period is unclear, or at least I don't think it's any less unclear than what is in 701A, which is what they're proposing to use. But if people disagree, then that's proof that it's not clear. So.
And this is definitely different than just a little technical change. I mean, this is a policy change. So I think we do need to look at it more solidly before we move forward.
Other thoughts from committee members? I know this is a lot of new concepts in a new world for this 5.5 new members to the committee. I understand that four of the 5.5 are brand new for the legislative process. So some of those you may have to go hold your nose and.
So my next question
Go.
is, so Wayne came to see you and he talked to you about this. So did he highlight what their conversation, like, did they have much of a conversation? Or was it just kind of like, well, we'll put it.
They didn't have much of a conversation. He seemed to indicate this is from the administration, which it is, because it's
Yeah.
BAA comes from the administration.
Well, my concern is how much conversation they had.
I don't think they had any.
Okay.
We sounded like not much of that.
Okay, well,
And
that's what
Wayne,
matters.
and Gina, you're the liaison with
Wayne. yeah.
Wayne, and you didn't hear anything. Did you
No.
hear anything?
Mm-mm.
So I think this kind of, we skipped it, we missed it when, went through what the whole BAA is that approach sent to each committee. Go through this was missed. I think it was missed all over the place. So when they're doing markup, you focus in and this came up and says, oh, this pertains to our committee. So it's kind of, things are going fast in the building at times and things do slip through the cracks. And I think this is one that slipped through the cracks.
And it's possible that you're going to hear a good explanation as to the thinking, and that maybe we just need some refinement of language to get at the goal here. And again, I would just stress the point I was trying to make earlier. A lot of times I'll come into a room, walk through a section, and I won't have a lot of questions about what the section does. I'll just be walking through the language and saying it does A, B, and C. In these cases where we use lots of accounting language and the drafting starts in rooms that I'm less used to being in, it just ends up looking different. And so it can create these mismatches between expectation and language that can produce odd consequences and are worth spending time on. So,
So our recommend was, the three of us thought this is a real policy decision. This is not a technical change that the administration is asking. It's a real policy. And that we should not include this language in the budget adjustment, and that both committees do work on it going forward and figure out how we really resolve. Do we do a reallocation of cash? Is it based on what's encumbered? How do we really do it?
the last thing I will say to try to articulate a position that would make sense of why this would be presented as a technical amendment is that if the sole concern of this committee is with the expenditures that would have been authorized in the capital bill, but are being shunted from general obligation dollars, bonded dollars to cash, then, the meaningful effect that this has beyond removing the encumbrance piece, which is a real piece. So they're removing the encumbrance piece. You could see this as just applying new standards to the other infrastructure subaccount. These standards already apply to the capital infrastructure subaccount through 701A. But you do lose that encumbrance piece. And maybe that's not meaningfully different if you have a check in it 2 years for the reallocation process. But I just want to try to articulate why I think it's plausible that they presented this as a technical amendment and we see it differently. And I think the utility would just be to get the explanation. Do they just see this as applying new conditions that already apply to the capital infrastructure subaccount, to the other infrastructure subaccount? And then what are they thinking about the encumbrance piece? Is that just not meaningful to them?
But this spending authority in E,
It's
only-
specific, right?
it's only specific to the capital,
So it's,
not the others.
yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I was thinking broadly. No, wait, that's a good point.
So, what you're gonna find for new members, what you're gonna find in the legislative world, a program is put in place, whatever it may be. So the cash fund is a new program, a new function. Sometimes you gotta let those things play out for a couple, 3, 4 years, and then go back and tweak it. So as Joe said, it's been in existence for a short period of time, and now we're starting to have, it doesn't have a long enough track record to really know how it's gonna operate, but it's been money in there for 2 fiscal years. It started, there was FY 23 had some money in there, FY 24 and FY 25. So if you bump that up against our normal capital bill reallocation statute, when you're beyond the 2 years, so that would be FY 23, you start looking at those dollars to see if they've gone out the door, or if they're encumbered, or if they're just sitting there and there's no plan to use them. And then in the capital world, we may reallocate those dollars. So then the question is, do we do that same process for the cash fund for our capital projects? And this is the first year we really have to deal with this. Do we do it or do we not do it? Because we've hit that 2-year threshold. And I really don't know which direction to go in for this. I mean, I think it's good to hold off the language because we don't know what direction to go in. Because I'm thinking of those projects that are funded with cash. Some of those projects also have bonded dollars for the same project. They're intertwined. And then there's also some of those projects, like an example, and the governors recommend for FY 26 and 27, there's $8 million in cash for FY 26 for major maintenance. And if we don't have a review of that, there's $8 million sitting in BGS for major maintenance that comes out of cash and not capital. And then we don't know if they get the money out the door or not, because who's going to look at it? That's what's going through my mind. James.
My question is for you. When do we have to tell them the answer to this? Because, what?
Today?
Today? Oh,
Well, that's why I gave him a heads up last night. And Robin said to me, she sent me an email last evening. She said, we can deal with this we can deal in the big bill. So I think they're willing to.
the reason I asked, because I would want to know, I don't have a problem with this actually, but I want to hear from a couple people or talk to some people in appropriations about what conversations they had. That would be my only reason for holding off. But,
Go
But
talk
do
to
you
Wayne.
have-
yeah,
do you-
but that's why I asked if it needed to be done today or if it's.
You know, it's-
James, do you have an understanding of what we do going forward? Well, I'm glad you do because the rest of us don't.
Well, that's why I said I wanted to talk to a few people about what conversations they had and if they understand as well, or, you know.
I think the way appropriations committee works is every member of the committee has different departments and agencies of government. They don't look at everything like we do here. So like Trevor, Representative Squirrel, he has the courts, he has DOC. He's got a few other pieces, but those are the big ones. Wayne has the vets home. I think he has the military and he has BGS. So those are the parts of the budget. Each member of the appropriations has a part of that general fund budget that they do the work. They connect with those departments, agencies, it's in their purview and get the information. And then they relay that to the full committee.
You said that one more time really quick with those two, what they're doing, what they have.
Trevor has the courts and DOC.
Okay.
And Kevin and Sean are our liaison. And Trevor is the appropriations
Right.
liaison to
Yep.
us.
Sorry, I need to run.
Gotta go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
Happy Friday.
You'll be back.
Wayne is
Any
BGS.
questions if you have thoughts about this, or it sounds like this is going to be a continued conversation on the BAA piece, so
Yeah.
we'll figure it out. Just need to hear from some folks about what the thinking is.
Yeah. Thank you, John.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Helpful.
You too.
And then Wayne LaRoche is the liaison to us because he has BGS.
Okay, great.
And Gina is our liaison, so she would work with Wayne.
Okay, got it.
And this would have been,
This is something simple that they didn't talk about.
right, Wayne should have brought that to your attention.
Yeah,
And it slipped through the cracks, so at the last minute on Wednesday, he said this, because they were doing markups, so then it came up to this, have we heard anything, do we know anything? No.
yeah.
And I didn't pick it up, going through the list of things, because they gave us the whole BAA and scrolling through. I didn't pick this up.
Yeah.
Well,
But I-
and the
oh, sorry.
the importance of this is when it's put out as a kind of a minor little technical change. And it may be, but we've got to make sure so that the cash funding is there in the future for us to be using appropriately on our projects. So it is a little deeper dive than just as, kind of off the cuff, a little technical change. I certainly want to know that we've got that money going forward.
Joe and then
I think
Troy.
Troy was before me.
Troy?
Just a heads up to repo committee, Alice, James, if you want in, and Scott. This has shed a new light on the repo process for me, so I'm gonna just become as familiar as I can with these two statutes, especially 701. I'll have a summary and potential changes to our committee either later tonight or tomorrow sometime. I just wanna,
It's a 5-year thing,
it's a 5-year thing.
because we have some money out there in 2011, 12, 13, 14.
That we questioned last.
But that's capital, that's not cap.
Capital.
So, but I will copy you all. James, do you want in on that? I'll copy you sometime either later tonight or it'll probably be tomorrow on kind of my thoughts. And I've already got some thoughts spinning on an email that Scott can then send out to agencies and departments that this is going to impact.
So that's when appropriation starts for the year, they have certain expenditures that are not discretionary. They just have to make them. I assume bond and debt payments are part of those
Yeah, it's gonna be what, 81 million
this year.
this coming year, FY
Wait,
26.
what the point is that number, if the trajectory for that number persists in going down relative to the size of the general fund appropriation, and then appropriations conceivably has more avail. So basically what's the net effect of reduced bonding is that appropriations will increasingly be able to determine whether or not this committee has funding to do what it needs to do with the capital bill.
Well,
It
yes and no.
that would be the net effect.
Well, on the cash piece, but not on the bonding piece. The bonding piece, it's not appropriations committee that gets involved in
No,
that.
what he's saying is that,
However, as the bonding,
If the bonding capacity goes down,
yeah,
which we're advised is the intention,
right, your debt service is going to go down.
correct.
And the reason that our bonding capacity is going down, possibly, is we have cash available to do projects that would normally be bonded for.
what Joe's point is,
But further, yes,
as it becomes cash, it becomes, we don't control that.
Right.
Appropriations does, and that, I think he's alluding to a concern that.
largely eviscerates the capabilities of whoever's sitting in this committee. And the treasurer testified, so part of it may be bonding capacity, but part of it is that the state, his office, considers it in large part to be more fiscally responsible to pay for things with cash than, you know, spending money on interest, which makes sense. I have no issue with that. But in some way, shape or form, there should be some assurance that there's some kind of minimum operating standards to take care of the things that are needed within the future capital bills.
That's what we struggle with.
Do you know what he means? So like, if there's $100 million in bond, if we control that,
We
but
don't
if it's
control
down
the
to say
cash.
20 million,
Yeah.
million and the rest is cash, then all of a sudden,
We have no
somebody else has a
control.
lot more
Yeah.
control. So
That's
that's a,
essentially what we do is we don't allocate that this year, but we just allocate for everybody else for the next 20 years. These are the bonding.
but that's your concern is what you're saying, right? Am I not right in regurgitating what you're saying? That
Yeah, exactly.
the lower the bonding, the more the cash, the less control this committee will have over that. Is what you're concerned.
Correct. You could have future years where you just don't have, you walk in here and you get, next to nothing to work with. And you can,
I just want to.
pull a project out of a hat and call it a day, talk about
I
corrections.
just want to make sure I understood what you're saying.
So then that, if in that type of scenario, then that, in my mind, just my mind, makes it more important that there is a process to look at how those cash dollars are going out the door for projects that we authorize in our capital.
That's fair. Absolutely. That's a separate question. But even, this 26-27 capital bill, and my only knowledge of the 24-25 is that which you use for a primer for us. But, we have substantially fewer aggregate dollars to deal with. And we also have things in the bill that I don't think normally would live in the capital bill
Yeah, there's,
without enumerating those projects. And so it's a pincher movement.
we have a ship with deck chairs on it. The chairs are on the deck. And you move those chairs around, but you're not expanding the deck.
Well, that's true, but to ignore deferred maintenance is one of the last deck chairs you want to let go over the side.
And those are the decisions we're gonna have to make when we get into markup. That's why for testimony, it's really, really important to draw out as much information as you can from folks, regardless of where they come from. Because the more information we have, the more solid our decision making. And that's what's really important for testimony for anyone that comes through here on a capital bill, but also for any policy issue, to really draw out those questions, because You gotta ask the questions to get the information.
But to the gentleman who's here, if approach was used to seeing 4.6% of the general fund is bond payments, which I guess is the historical, and my only data point is immediate prior testimony. Then for there to be some kind of mechanism whereby we know the capital bill is gonna have a 4% aggregate and approach can't play with that without the consent of this committee, I don't think is inappropriate, and in effect is no different encumbrance on appropriate's ability to function than is now. It's actually less. If they're used to 4.6, 4 is, 15% less than what they're accustomed to.
So a lot of times people don't connect the capital budget with bonding, how much pressure that can put on the appropriations.
It's a
Debt service.
no different than not paying off your credit card balance. It's very real.
So another piece too that will play into putting pressure on the general fund is in our world of trying to replace Woodside, the juvenile center. Instead of putting pressure on the capital bill to build it as a state-owned building through capital funds, because you're talking, I think we're talking, I forgot, was it 20 million? I think it was around 24 million to build the juvenile center. Yeah, yeah, it's not cheap. This stuff is not cheap.
Well, that's-
And, but if we were doing that in the capital bill, that's pressure on bonded dollars. Okay, so the decision was made last year, last biennium really, to do a design build model, which we have the land at this point. And we're working with a company, going out with RFPs, and the company's gonna design it and build it. But we lease it back. So those lease payments are coming out of the general fund. So we're putting pressure on appropriations committee in the out years. And we gave them a heads up. It's like, we're doing this, so you're gonna see an increase in DCF's budget because there's gonna be lease payments now. So that's how it's interrelated.
And that's another thing on the cash. So there's large things like the new women's facility or the Woodside replacement or Mary's Champion project, the Bennington Battle Monument.
Why do you say it that way?
But there may be legislative desire to designate cash for those projects in the future. But it may need to be conceivably might be a reserve built over a period longer than 5 years, so it's not necessarily encumbered yet.
That's
But there's an intent to do something because it would be next to impossible to do one of those projects in a 2-year cycle in
Yeah,
its
well,
entirety.
that's what we're struggling with the new women's correctional facility.
Sure.
We're gonna get some information on that next Friday.
Yeah, you need money for it.
We've
and-
got 16 million already put aside. That project's gonna be about 90 million.
So
So we've already, over the last 3 years, have put bonded dollars aside for that. We've been building. Now, we haven't got any money in this year's capital bill because we still are working through where the land. You can't do anything until you have the land.
But as a matter of public policy, would it not be okay to designate cash? It's older than 2 years for a purpose such as that? And maybe that's something that wants to be considered.
You can do that, but there's pressures on the general fund as well.
I
So it's
understand.
working with our respective colleagues in our other committees. It's not a decision made in isolation in one committee. Because they have other pressures over there that we may not even be aware of.
Everyone has their tale of woe.
Well, it may not be a tale of woe. It may be obligations and commitments that we've made and built our base budget that we have to fund. And, look at what our credit ratings agencies said. We are financially solid because of the decisions the legislature has made over years and years. That's why our credit rating
AA plus,
almost, AA plus.
AA plus.
Because we have such strong oversight of our budgeting process and we balance our budgets. Our budgets are always balanced. Other states don't operate that way. And that's a plus for us, as the credit agencies stated that. So that's why we really work together with our appropriations committee, and our appropriations committee works with us. It's really, really important. And there are times that we have been able to help the appropriations committee with $2 million that we've been able to free up. I remember one session, we freed up $15 million to help them. That was about 7 years ago. We found, and we weren't doing cash at that point. We were finding projects that could be paid for.
Went on a project,
their end.
field trip with the Capitol bill.
On their end, we found some items on their end that could qualify for bonded dollars. And we
Understood.
pulled them into our bill, which then freed up some general fund dollars for them. So it goes, and we did the same thing with transportation fund. We've done that. So the money committees are intertwined for that. We've done a lot of clean water work with transportation.
They certainly are, but it's the way this cash fund mechanism is set up, it marginalizes the relative weight of this committee. So that's what I find that effective of doing,
And that will be,
which people might be fine with.
well, that's a concern, and that was a concern from the get-go, that cash out there can be used for all different purposes. And that's the crux of the issue. If you're going to be talking about money in the cash fund that goes towards capital projects in our bill, do we as a committee have authority to look at those dollars that are older than 2 years? And do we reallocate those dollars? Do we make a recommend to reallocate those dollars, or do we just keep those dollars in that fund? Do we need a mechanism to review the cash fund appropriations over the last 2.5 to 3 years? Because they're intertwined. Some of those projects are intertwined with projects that are being funded with a capital bill. This is all new, because now it's been going on for a few years.
Well, that's why I asked. I just love to be able to track, like, have a mechanism to track it. Right? Don't you want to know where that cash is and know like what year it did get spent and it didn't? It seemed like something happened yesterday when we were talking to Joe and you caught a cash allocation that they didn't catch.
Yeah, I don't remember what that was for.
Well, that was at the heart of my question
That
about
wasn't
the
the
million
reuse.
for major.
No, but it was,
It was
Around 30 grand or something.
No, it was a lot more than that. It was a couple $100,000.
I'm sorry.
And I wanted to ask you about that.
It was a,
It's in the capital, it's in the capital bill. Yeah, it was one of the.
From
it was
last,
planning, reuse and contingency, I think.
No,
I have
that
it.
they
It was,
knew. That
yeah,
they
it was.
knew.
It was planning, reuse and contingent, but
they knew that one.
there was, but
There
there
was
was,
something
but
else.
there was money in there that, and I was like,
120,
Wow.
120 HVAC.
right. So what was like, my gut feeling was like,
2.5 million.
why didn't we know where that money was? That's all.
Yeah, it's 2.5 million. We put it in last year.
Okay.
There was $1 million put in FY '24 and $1 million put in, $1 million
Oh, yes,
25 and
yes, yes.
25.
Okay.
HVAC steam lines, 120 State Street.
All right.
That's why so,
It's an ominous project in the state.
oh, yeah, but that's 2.5 million of cash out there. How is that tied in with the current appropriation, the current request that they've made for 120 State Street? Because it's all tied in.
Yeah.
So is the committee, are you fine with what Troy, Mary and I decided to hold off, recommend them holding off this language that was proposed in BAA, and that we do more work on it with appropriations committee?
Yes, for me.
I get the impression you've got to make a decision by today anyway.
Yeah,
We're not
'cause-
holding on.
Yeah.
3 hours.
I gave them the heads up.
And it's not that we don't have a better understanding going forward, because it can be put on to the capital bill or I mean, the approps bill of that. going forward. So we're not going to just disregard it. We're going to deal with it. But given more than a day to look at it, and really know where our monies are, because that was our main concern when the cash fund came. Be, kind of present for us to be using. We always were kind of wondering, well, how are we going to have these monies yearly and where are they going to go? And what are we going to do with? Are we setting ourselves up for out of years? Also, we don't have cash or something. So we just want to do it right so that we've got it in place so that these projects can. And some of them have been on the docket for a very long time.
And that could be, as Mary just said, and this is the important part, it could be great policy, it could be bad. I think that it's probably pretty decent, but just found out like at the last minute. And so we should have some more time. I wish we had more than today. If we could make a decision Tuesday, and found out yesterday, that would be different, but we don't. And so we just have to collectively agree whether we're gonna go and say, well, the information we were given last night as we're walking out the door, or do we wait and, even if it's good policy, so that's the disappointing part. It would have been nice to know about this a couple days ago,
It
because
fell
we
through
could have
the
easily
cracks.
talked about it in a day. But,
Absolutely.
So Gina, could you connect back with Wayne and just confirm that, yes, section 78, that language, if they could hold off putting it in the bill,
Yeah,
and that we'll deal with it as the session progresses?
yeah,
Okay, just to circle, because he was included in the email last night.
okay.
If you could just get back to him
Oh,
on that. So we got a few more minutes here before lunch. I just want to check in with committee members. Just as a check in how people are feeling. Any thoughts on what you've heard so far for the capital bill? Fusion, clarity, what's working, what's not working for you folks? Sean?
So in one of our meetings this morning, we were asked or told or whatever that we're going to be voting on the BAA next week.
Yep. It's on the floor.
Just how do I know that we're supposed to vote for that? Yes or no?
Okay, so appropriations is going to finish up their work on the bill today and get it in shape. And then joint fiscal office is going to work over the weekend. Put it in shape, right? Not you.
Making that clear.
Yeah, they're going to put it in bill form. And then Monday appropriations committee comes in, they're going to vote it out. Okay. So the bill will be introduced on Tuesday.
Right.
So if you look online, there'll be a bill number. If you get a paper packet, it'll be in this committee. And then we have a caucuses on Tuesday. So right now, we don't know if this bill will be presented to each caucus individually or if there'll be a caucus of the whole. That hasn't been decided yet. So that's where you get the information. There'll be a lot of documents that will be sent out with the budget. And it will be really at the caucuses that the appropriations committee will make the presentation.
Can I ask, why wouldn't the caucuses be informed together?
It's up for leadership to
I
make.
know,
those.
but why wouldn't? What would be the?
Sometimes,
rationale for
sometimes
splitting it
if
up?
you're in a smaller group, you have more questions that are asked, you can learn better. And sometimes if something is really controversial, sometimes you do it, it's a caucus of a whole, sometimes you do it individual caucus. It just is up to leadership.
So I don't mean to be critical, but that's just sounds like politics to me rather than having information given to everybody so we can all make the right decision.
well, everybody gets the information.
Everybody gets the same
But the
information.
questions, the presentation and the opportunity to question the
You
information.
can watch
if
it
you're
on
separate.
YouTube.
And caucuses are a place to really, each caucus can do a much deeper dive in some of the issues. You're gonna have that debate on the floor.
Yeah.
Beyond that, the public caucuses can be attended by anyone.
But the questions and answers and the debate, that happens when the bill is presented on the floor. And sometimes I'll help out James and Mary and Troy. I mean, sometimes we do caucus of the whole and sometimes it's individual caucuses.
And
It just
there's a
depends.
lot of different reasons for that, which are not in this committee's purview, but it's a larger scale. If you're asking how the bill works. It can be something, I don't think the BA is that controversial, but there might be an issue that is more controversial that Republicans, generally speaking, might feel one way and Democrats and generally speaking, might feel a different
So
way.
you want to be
And
your own.
You don't want to have a question being like, maybe you have a question, you guys were talking about something kind of, let's say sensitive this morning. Have the wrong third member in that conversation. Every time you ask a question, well, that keeps it from having open and honest discussions where some of us think that you should always be able to have them. But so it's a matter of making sure everybody feels comfortable, but there is, whether most of us like to believe and act like we're all here together in a family, which I generally feel we are, there are times where the two siblings have to do things on their own. And you just have to, like, that's just how it is. And we're not going to change it in the commerce. Well, we're not in commerce. I hope we're not changing it. The institutions, that's a house.
I understand it.
Yeah, it's a house policy, not a.
You said it in 15 words.
Yeah.
I said politics. That's what it is. But
I mean, you just want to go back.
Practice
real, I can handle it.
Yeah.
I'm practicing.
You're a
to be
big boy.
president.
I'm a big boy. I can, but you
So
know,
I don't know, so the information, there'll be a lot of documents that's gonna be distributed to every member. Opportunity for questions from every member, it could be in a caucus of a whole, could be individual caucuses on Tuesday.
Okay.
And then on Wednesday is an opportunity, it's not up on the floor, we'll be up on the floor Thursday and Friday next week. So Wednesday is an opportunity for people to seek out members of the appropriations committees. I've got a concern about this section, I've got a concern about this section. For that. And you'll figure out what's going on.
Yeah,
What's,
okay. I was just wondering, because all new.
this is new.
It's not a dumb question, ask questions.
And the other thing that I would say, so since you asked, like, how do I know how to vote?
You'll figure that out.
That's up to you at the end of the day.
Yeah.
It's not up to the I mean, I don't want, please don't beat me up, leadership. It's not up to them. It's up to you, our constituents, you guys.
So is there, I appreciate that question, that's very helpful, because I know this is all new, a lot of people. You'll get in the swing of it in 2 weeks, you'll be in a whole different mindset in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and in May, you're gonna be in a total different mindset.
Good.
Until they get to the budget.
Yeah, right, wait till you get to the budget, wait till you get to taxes. So anything on the capital bill that's coming up that folks have questions or testimonies working for you, not working for you?
I mean, we haven't heard too much yet. We heard a little bit of BGS and we heard historic preservation, which
The courts are gonna be this
the
afternoon.
courts are coming up. I mean, there are some projects as a general thing that I may not question the project, but I have serious reservations about what the ongoing use of the facility is.
Can you give an example?
Yeah, how many people actually go to the Essex County Courthouse?
Oh.
Why are we buying a HVAC project at the Johnson campus? I'm sure we'll get testimony when nobody uses it. Or very few people use it.
Oh, well, you can answer that question of the courts today, because they're coming in this. Gina?
Yeah, I just had a question specifically about the Pittsford firing range, because I wasn't in here. Was that just for design and planning?
I think so, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, because
1.5.
that's gonna be like a $20 million.
I think doesn't it?
We really need a waste time on design and planning for it. We've got so many other
Well, that's
stressors.
it's markup.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But there was testimony on,
on the firing range from Joe. Yeah, I had to step out, so.
What's the tenure on that, Gina?
oh, it's a lot.
Yeah, it's 10.
Yeah. Gina, I remember what he said was that they've really changed the way that they train and that they don't want the snow getting down in there.
Oh, yeah.
Because the guys are doing like tactical movement in there. They don't want them slipping and.
I guess there are also some water quality issues.
Right.
Is there lead cartridges?
Quality.
Well, that's the thing. You gotta have a whole
Water quality with the
HVAC
lead.
system in there.
They can't.
So those are all pieces when we start doing markup. And we'll do, we go line by line on the spreadsheet. When you come to the firing range, these are the issues that get put out on the table. And then we kind of say, what do we do here, folks?
But-
What do we do? Do we accept what the administration's requested? Say they requested 200,000 for design and it's an FY 27.
But to start talking about relative benefit, it's kind of tough because we haven't heard on very small
Right, I'm
portions.
saying when we get to markup, which is the end of February, that'll be after we've heard the testimony, we're gonna hear testimony on all the line items. So then, exactly what Gina brought up, when we start doing markup, which is going through line by line, looking at the dollar amount, going back to the information we received in testimony. And say, just like what Gina brought up, is this really something we need to do? And it could be, if it's $200,000 for design that's being put in FY 27.
We're not even thinking until.
I think it's FY
28.
Yeah, but FY 27 is when they have the initial design money,
Yeah.
right? We could say, do we need to tie up $200,000 for design in FY 27? They're not doing anything in FY 26, so why don't we put a placeholder in there? 50,000,
Yeah,
and then we'll revisit it next year. And then you've freed up 150,000. There's those are the, now, I'm not saying that's what we're gonna do, but that's a balance there. It's like, well, if they put 200,000 and the design documents or programming isn't even gonna start until 27, and we're back here in January at 26, we can revisit this and we'll just put a placeholder in.
This is where Alice has said multiple times about not getting ahead of your skis for anybody, whether new or old, is each project is going to be laid out in front of us as we go along. We're going to take testimony. You can, as Dallas said, put a placeholder in your head and back of your head somewhere, but you're not necessarily going to make a value decision at that point in time. Like, we're just talking about the range, the firing range. But when you get the whole picture and we get into what's called markup, then we'll go and we'll have these discussions about, well, I don't know if this is as important. I mean, there'll be more than just, I don't think it's that important, but in layman's terms, this doesn't rise to the level of this, or this project is going to be implemented for 3 years. So why don't we push this smaller allocation for design or whatever off for later? You'll have those discussions then. So just be cognizant, as something I've said probably most days, of the organization you have in your own head about how these conversations go. And don't get ahead of yourself, or don't get out of the conversations, because it will just really end up confusing you, and it might confuse other people too. And also, when we're hearing testimony, make sure, and I'll harp on this every day, it's something I'm not going to let up on, is your question relevant to what we're talking about? Is the person you're asking, and I'm not going to give examples online, but is your question even relevant to the individual that's here? Like, not does James or Brian agree with each other, but is it even relevant to what they're talking about? We're talking about buildings, and then all of a sudden we're talking about something completely different. And again, I don't want to give real examples because they have happened. Just, is it relevant to what we're talking about? And just really think about that, because organization and how we run things and how we communicate is how we make sure we do the best work possible. And if we're getting sidetracked with stuff, whether it's a moral value or anything else that we may have about a policy that we may disagree with at a higher level, that an entity has to react to, but they're reacting to the policy that they're required to react to. Well, the debate on the policy doesn't matter. It's they're reacting to that policy, and that's what they're required to do. Hopefully everybody understands what I'm saying, and then I'll just drop it there until next time.
So the whole legislature, it's a process. It's a process. So any decision we make, we finish with our capital bill, I'm just warning you. It could change when it goes to approach. Some of it could change. Usually doesn't, but some of it could. Could have, hello. You could have a floor amendment. Our bill could be out there. We finish reporting on the floor and some people are upset in terms of decisions we made. They may have a floor amendment to want to change the money around. And then it goes over to the Senate. They can do what they wish.
Another game.
That's on a whole other thing. And then they come back to us. They may, I'm gonna use the firing range as an example. We may put in 50,000. They say, oh, no, we want this project to go and we're gonna put the 200,000 back in.
Yep.
Then we have to negotiate. How do we resolve that? How do we resolve it? And we could say, okay, for cash, I'm just throwing a number out. We could say we're gonna use 15 million for cash. Okay, we've got that agreement with our appropriations committee, blah, blah, blah. It goes over to the Senate. The Senate could say, we're only gonna use 10 million for cash. Because our Senate appropriations committee wants 5 million of that for something else.
Walleyes.
And then we gotta figure all that out.
Ready to go.
We gotta figure all that out.
With the walleye bill,
The two institutions committees and the two appropriations committees. It's making sausage.
Yep.
That's all it is.
As Alice said, if the Senate disagrees with us, then it comes back and sometimes the chairs, the committees can iron something out and then it works. And sometimes they can't, then you have to go to the official conference committee, which is fun. Anybody's been on one, they're okay. And then they have to agree. And then what they say is what the both parties, both committees bring back to their respective bodies and they vote on it. And then you have to tell people like the body as a whole, like say if Alice, Gina and I are on a conference committee with the Senate, and we agree with them on a policy, when we go and present it back to the body, we have to remind everybody that you vote for this
Yeah,
or
or nothing.
we're not going home, because you can't leave until it's there are issues, by the way.
Sorry, got a lot of this.
Outside of the 4 bills that Alice mentioned, if it's something that's like different, yes, you can but we don't agree and it's done.
Nation's out.
But on the capital bill, so the budget, or whatever, you can't leave until there's agreed on. So sorry.
The same word.
I ran off.
Well, I know folks are confused. You'll get less confusing as you start seeing how the process works. You just now started seeing how a bill comes to the floor and how it's reported on the floor. So remember what I said way back, first day of our session, when the committees first got together? When a bill's being reported from this committee by a reporter, it'll be one of you folks who will be reporting a bill at some point in time on the floor. You'll be up there, standing up all by yourself. But it's really important that the committee support the reporter of that bill. We do not leave the person out there hanging. It's really important. You haven't seen an interrogation yet happen with a reporter of a bill. But when you start seeing that, that'll give you a flavor. And it's really important that if we have a reporter of the bill from this committee on something and the person keeps getting interrogated and keeps getting interrogated on the floor, we come and help that person. We stand up, we give examples of some testimony we received, we explain why we made a decision on the language a certain way. And the committee comes together and helps that person report the bill. It's really important. You don't leave that person hanging. And also, if a person is a reporter and you get in real trouble, you yield to the chair. You say, Madam Speaker, may I yield to the member from Springfield?
Yep.
Or
got that written. Yeah.
And the
or the
other,
member from Fairfield.
Or Mary.
and the other thing is,
Yeah, right.
and it's really, veterans know this, but, and I know it was talked in your orientation, I'm sure, and I know that we talked about it the first week. Is let's just say the bill comes out of here and it's 10-2, or not 10-2, but 9-2.
9-2.
You're done. Like you don't go to the two are done. The two don't.
You had your
not.
battle.
You do not go to the floor and debate and question your committee. You can say no, There's no law against saying no, like
Yeah, but
you.
you don't
vote-
fight
can
your
vote-
committee.
vote for
Don't,
no.
you don't
Right.
fight your
But
committee
you-
on the floor.
You don't, and you don't make statements about the thing on the floor. I mean,
Well, that's logical. That'd be like hearing your own appeal after you presided over the.
people do it. That doesn't happen very often.
Never know.
You know, and it's not like there's a law that says you're going to jail if you do it. It's more of a common practice, and you know, it's just a respectful thing. You might be very passionate, but you might be able to say something in a nice way, but it's very rare that it happens. But I don't think I've ever seen anybody, and no, I have seen somebody on the committee that's got into the debate, and that's just not.
not
You did
appropriate.
it here, and you lost, and you're.
Don't you have the opportunity to write a minority report too?
Was this Congress?
No, we don't do that.
We don't do that, okay.
No.
We don't do that.
Supreme Court?
You fight your battles in committee.
Yeah.
You fight, that's what it is, committee process. You know, we're gonna have some battles, we're gonna have some disagreements.
Yeah.
You know, but we're gonna find a path forward that people can
Yeah.
agree to. That's the goal. You find a path forward that people can agree to, and it's gonna have to be give and take on everyone's part.
Yeah.
You know, you're not gonna get everything you want.
Yeah.
Not in this building. You're not gonna get anything.
Nope.
If you get a loaf, if you get a slice of a loaf, doing good.
God.
Speaking of loaves.
Well, I do have a desire to leave at 2:00 today.
Yeah, let's go.
I'm looking forward to a very short periods of questions after lunch.
You tell me.
I think he's-
I think
he's projecting.
I think Joe's telling us he's not gonna ask a lot of questions.
Recommending.
No, just lead by example.
You know, it'd be great if we could start coming in here, maybe 1:15, 10:01, because the judiciary folks end up coming in a little.
Get out of my, we could at 12:30.
Yeah, because some of us.
And it's Terry Carson.
Yeah.
Terry's coming. She's gonna have cookies probably.
And this isn't really an online comment, but like I just always remember like.
Are you ready to go up?